Victor Oquendo, who's in the city of Houston right now. As Ginger was explaining before, Houston is now, and it looks like will increasingly be, on the dirty side of this storm, meaning while it won't get hit by the eye of the storm, it will get hit with a lot of water, potentially life-threatening and property-damaging flooding. Victor, what has the city done to prepare, and what is it like there right now?
Well, Dan, right now it has just rained all through the night. That is likely going to be the case throughout the day, throughout the weekend, and as Ginger mentioned, throughout the rest of next week. But right now, the message from the mayor of Houston: do not evacuate. In fact, the opposite, telling his residents to stay off the roads. And he cited Hurricane Rita in 2005. The reason being, so many people tried to flee the city at the exact same time that it caused deadly gridlock. We're talking about 100 people who died as a result of accidents, medical emergencies, fires. More people died while trying to evacuate than from the hurricane itself. So we're trying to avoid that here in this area. But the big concern is, of course, flooding. For the people who were here in 2001 when Tropical Storm Allison hit, they remember it very well. More than 3 feet of rain fell in some spots in a very short period of time, just devastating Houston. Tens of thousands of homes destroyed. 23 people died. Roadways like 59 South, we're standing right next to, flooded as well. And since then, the city has spent nearly $1 billion to shore up those bayous to make sure that they do not overflow like they did in 2001. Right now, Dan, Amy, Houston bracing for some heavy rains from Hurricane Harvey.
Victor Oquendo in Houston heading into a perilous few days. Victor, thank you. It's 5:31 on the East Coast, and if you're just joining us, we want to reset and give you a sense of what we're doing right now. We're covering the big breaking news right now. Hurricane Harvey hitting the state of Texas hard. It is right now a Category 2 storm. It came ashore as a Category 4 at around 10:30 local last night. The damage already extensive, although the sun has not come up, and we're not going to be able to get a full sense of the damage yet. But landfall is just the beginning with this storm because of the winds and the storm surge. As horrible as they are, it is going to be the fact that this storm is likely to be stuck in place in this neck of the woods for days and days, dumping inches and inches of rain, leading to a lot of flooding. That is what has people like our chief meteorologist, Ginger Z, deeply concerned. So give us a sense of where things stand from your vantage point right now, Ginger.
It does. You just said it. Max sustained winds 100 miles per hour still, and this thing is inland. And so this is still a very dangerous hurricane. Just because it already made landfall, this is not falling apart super quickly. I want to read just a couple of the really urgent things that came in as it was making landfall last night. Peak wind gusts of 132 miles per hour. You had roofs being ripped off, shelters and different places collapsing. You had obviously trees and roadways filled. I print out, whenever these types of things happen, all of these reports, the storm reports. We could not even, we would waste too much paper. These were coming in so fast and furious from all of these towns, and especially in that northeast quadrant. And this morning, that storm is still blowing through. We've got those 100-mile-per-hour winds, tornado warnings that are still making their way on the map. There is a sense of, okay, it hit, but I do not want people to let up. I want them to know that that eye, and as we zoom in a little bit closer, I've been in a couple of hurricane eyes. I've had the opportunity to do that. It is not a fun place to be on that eye wall. That's where the strongest winds are. You still have that happening. Right there, Dan's circled where some of the heftiest winds are happening, but inside that eye, it gets quiet. You have a sense of calm, and then you still get the backside of the storm. Especially with a coastline like this, you can still see where those bands are coming on shore, still in Rockport, still in that area that got hit so hard. Some of those inlets and those islands, Port Aransas, that's where you're starting to see the wind even pick up again on the backside.
And right there on the northeast side, on the dirty side of that eye wall, is Port Lavaca. You can see right there on the map, and that is where ABC meteorologist, chief meteorologist Rob Marciano has been all through the night, battering those heavy winds and that stinging rain. And we want to check in with him again to see how it's going. Rob?
You got that right, Amy. It is stinging. And I know the eye wall is no picnic, either the front side or the back side, but I wouldn't mind being in the eye right now, a little calm air, maybe hear the birds chirping, maybe hear crickets as well. This wind has been absolutely relentless, and I know that the overall strength of this around the core of the eye is weakening as it's now on landfall, but it is the consistency of this wind that is really doing a number on southeast Texas right now. The wind field is uniform, and especially on the northeast side, as you mentioned, it is just hammering us, and it's keeping the water. I just took a peek around the side of the building. It's keeping the water from Lavaca and Matagorda Bay around us, so we are still surrounded by water. And of course, all this rain that's coming down, and obviously it's coming down sideways, it's piling up and trying to drain into the Gulf of Mexico. So any storm surge that wants to kind of naturally go back, it's not doing it. You've got rain piling up in that, and then the wind that continues to hold that water right up against the land. So I don't think I've ever experienced a situation like this where the storm surge is such a long duration. At least the position that we're in here, with a bay that's shallow, is easy to keep that water pinned up against a town like Port Lavaca. And I'm just grateful that the great majority, if not 100% of this town, at the lower elevation of this town, has evacuated. Here they heated the watering, but for the folks in Rockport and Fulton that got that eye last night, and the folks that chose to ride out the storm in those locations, those low-lying locations, not as well-built locations, what a frightening night, and still frightening morning it is for those folks down there. Just it's a real event, guys.
And Rob, the longevity of the winds, I like that you said that, because they are still going, and it almost acts like a washing machine where it's going to get things clean. It's going to take care. The wind does not stop. Last night they put up an extreme wind warning for that region that you're in, and that was for 115-mile-per-hour winds for 3 hours. So it is the consistency, right, Rob, that you've been standing in all night that really starts to do the significant damage. It weakens some of the structures. It rips things off.
Exactly right. I mean, look, it's physically pounding, obviously, but no one rightfully will stand out here for hours and hours on end. We all get to take breaks or at least sneak in. Like right now, I take a couple of steps here, and boom, I'm kind of out of it a little bit. But structures, look at this. I can barely. I'm actually sliding.
Wow.
Sliding without even trying here. So when you walk, you have to put your feet down, put some weight on it, and just lean into it if you have at all want a chance to stand up in hurricane force winds. And the long duration consistency of these winds obviously takes a beating on the body, but on the structures, as you mentioned, Ginger, that is where, especially the older ones, the weaker ones, those are the ones that are really taking a beating. And you hear it throughout the night. Parts of buildings coming off, not just the roar of the wind, but the clank and the rip of infrastructure that is literally being torn out around you. It's a frightening thing.
Yeah, Rob, I was going to ask you what you imagine. I mean, obviously it's still dark there, and you're in a somewhat protected area to be able to be talking to us right now. But I was wondering, with what you've heard and probably the few things you've seen flying around, what you think you'll wake up to, or what people will wake up to when the sunlight actually hits and you can really survey the damage.
I'm quite honestly, I'm fearful of what we're going to see. I remember during Hurricane Rita when that storm came ashore at night, and you don't really think about it, what's happening around you because you can't see it. But when the sun comes up and the winds die down and you're able to go out and scope out the land, you get a sense for obviously what happens, and it can be mind-blowing. So I would suspect that here in Port Lavaca, certainly the homes that are exposed more to the wind are going to have some significant damage. Folks that are farther south than here, in Fulton and Rockport, that got the eye of the storm. I mean, we've already seen some of those pictures, and you're talking about substantial structures that are completely flat. When you have a Category 4 storm that's coming on shore, the core of that storm is the equivalent of an EF2 or EF3 hurricane or tornado. You're talking about a large tornado that's coming on shore. So the wind event at landfall is absolutely monstrous, and we're going to get a look at that here soon once the sun comes up and the winds die down and we can poke around a little bit. But folks are going to be dealing with this infrastructure damage for weeks, if not months, here in southeast Texas.
Rob, we keep talking about the 1-2 punch here. There's the wind, which you've just spoken about so eloquently, but also, as you mentioned earlier, the water, this sustained storm surge, these high waves that are hitting repeatedly the coastline right now. And then on top of that, days and days of rain. So what in Port Lavaca, what has been done to protect against this flooding, and what is the forecast for when people can get back in their homes, given the inundation we're looking at right now and for days to come?
Well, yesterday and the day before, they came in with school buses, and they got people out with school buses. And I think that's why the main reason why it is a ghost. We often say, oh, it's evacuated, it's a ghost town. We drove around yesterday. I didn't see a soul, Dan. Not a soul. Maybe one hurricane researcher was out in their pickup truck, but I didn't see one resident out there. So they're outside of town. They're in the shelters well beyond the storm zone with friends and family. And when they come back, they're just going to, they'll be told when they'll be able to come back. And I would imagine it's not going to be today. You have multiple issues and hazards with the rain and the storm surge. Not just the waves. You've got sewer systems and drainage systems that can't drain. That underground infrastructure that all of a sudden now not only becomes damaged but becomes unsanitary. You're going to have your boiling water in parts of Corpus Christi. So that's an issue that takes a while to recover from. So it's not just a matter of the rain stops, the wind stops, the storm surge eventually goes away, and everybody just walks back into the house and it's nice and clean. No. After a major hurricane comes through, especially along the coastline, when you have a surge like we have, there is debris. It is unsanitary. It is a messy, and unhealthy in spots cleanup process.
Everything we take for granted in our everyday life goes up in the air and is in severe jeopardy in a situation like this. Rob Marciano, please take a moment and step inside to relatives safely. Please. Thank you very much for your reporting.
Thanks, Rob.
In a moment, I want to get to ABC's Matt Gutman. But first, let me ask you, Ginger, we talk a lot about storm surge. That is something of a term of art meteorologically.
Yeah.
Can you just explain in very simple language what is storm surge and how much damage is it creating right now as we speak?
So pressure changes within a hurricane, right? So you see pressure drop, and then basically the water on the front end of a storm rises. It actually, in the ocean, rises up.
So bigger waves.
Bigger waves, just like a bubble of water ahead of it. So if you were to push in a bathtub very hard and you would create your own, I don't want to say tsunami because it's nothing like that because it's much slower and much more in a bubble. I can't explain that as well, but it pushes toward the land and then it keeps pushing. So that piled up water is in front of this hurricane for days, and it is now rushing onto land.
Because unlike most hurricanes, which hit and then just keep moving inland, this one can't because it's blocked by high pressure to the north. So we just get that storm surge over and over and over again.
This morning we are, and it will keep going even through later this afternoon. And then we'll start to see, okay, it's moved inland enough. But then, as we talked about, it makes that turn and it tries to come back. And so now we're turning, people that were on the southwest side are now going to be on the northeast side. Then it's going to turn north again toward Houston. And so that track is so different. Wilma did something like this. The last time we had a Category 4 in the United States was Charlie in 2004. And I have to say, the science has changed so much even since then. But what's interesting, and just if I can show you this, we had satellite when Texas had their last Category 4, which was Carla, right, in 1961. This is the type of image, and I think we have it ready. This is the type of image that we were seeing. It was very rudimentary. It was one of the first satellites, and I believe Dan Manzo has this upstairs if we want to see it really quickly. That image of the satellite is so old and so, it's so difficult to tell anything. So we had very little way to say, hey, this is what's coming. We know exact wind speeds. We know exact storm surge. And now, today, we have something called GOES-16. It's very advanced, and we'll have images of both of those in just a bit.
What we're seeing on the screen right now, just so our viewers know, are live images coming out of our affiliate in Corpus Christi, Texas, which is another city getting hit hard by Harvey right now. Let's take a quick listen. No audio. Sorry for that. But speaking of Corpus Christi, we do have ABC's Matt Gutman standing by in that city, which is, as we said, also being pummeled by Hurricane Harvey, a historic storm that came ashore as a Category 4, is now a Category 2 and creating, at this point, untold damage. Matt Gutman, do we have you?
You have me, Dan. You have me. You know, one of the places that has been most damaged, and you know, where we have the greatest concern right now is Rockport. Now, I mentioned earlier in the broadcast, we drove up there. It's about 30 miles away from where we are, right up the shore. Now, just getting there is going to be a problem for rescuers because it is a very flat, low-lying area. All of that is already going to be flooded. There is simply nowhere for the water to go. This entire town could easily be submerged by 6 to 12-foot storm surges that you guys have been talking about so much. That is the major concern, and overnight we started hearing these cataclysmic reports from city officials there. Apparently there was significant damage to the courthouse, the high school, a senior center. The roof collapsed there. All of this stuff is trickling out. There have been reports of people trapped in their homes. Authorities trying to get to those people, but again, we showed you the debris in the roadways everywhere here. Very hard to navigate these places, and that's really the concern. You know, we don't know what we're going to see when the light comes up, and I guess in many ways neither do officials here. But you know, Rockport was right in the bullseye of that storm, and directly over it, packing those 130+ mile-per-hour winds. And again, if there was any place it could hit, that was probably one of the worst. Low, nowhere for the water to go. The buildings, you know, we're not talking about major concrete structures, lots of smaller houses, things like that, a population of about 8,700 people. So grave concern for those seaside towns, including Port Lavaca, where Rob is right now. So these places just got hammered, and they're still getting hammered as we speak. And again, we won't know the full extent of the damage until the light comes up, and possibly even later. And it's going to be hard to get enough help to these people quickly enough. Hopefully nobody has been seriously hurt by these collapsed roofs and buildings. Incidentally, it's been so bad in Rockport that they actually moved people into the jail in order to ensure that they would be able to protect them, Dan.
And Matt, let me ask you this, because you were talking about when we first checked in with you, there was debris all over the roadway where you are. Tell us a little bit about what it was like when the winds were whipping, what you heard, what the intense moments were like as you weathered the storm.
You know, one of the things Rob described sort of leaning into the wind, and obviously there's the impact of the wind, but one of the things that struck me was the sound of it. You know, you think you see a hurricane, you think you feel it, but you don't think about hearing it. So there is all this mixture of sounds. There was the howl of the wind. There was a rumble, which sounded very eerie. Lightning, thunder, and then all of these things sort of exploding around you. As I mentioned earlier, the plexiglass panels from the hotel popping off and then shattering when they hit the ground. Things like this. I don't know what this thing is, but, you know, skittering on the ground, creating metal against concrete, metal street signs just blowing by you, trash cans tumbling away, all these different sounds, and it's pitch black. You can't actually see what's going on around you. You just know that stuff is flying, things are moving, there are leaves, palm fronds, and that's why it is so scary. Anything that's not battened down and literally hammered into the ground, and some things that are like, there are 2 stoplights down the street, maybe we'll show you a little bit later, is basically going to come off. And there's that uncertainty of what is going to happen. And again, this is why authorities throughout this part of Texas, along the Gulf Coast, are telling people, don't go anywhere, do not get in your car. Maybe you won't get hurt, but if you get a flat tire or 2 flat tires, you are stuck. And if the water starts to rise, you could be in serious jeopardy. Those are the major concerns here.
Yeah, the threat is certainly far, far from over where you are and throughout much of Texas. Matt Gutman, thank you so much. Ginger, you were shaking your head with what Matt just said.
Last night I was watching some of the feeds from storm chasers, and one of the storm chasers, a renowned was a National Geographic photographer, was tweeting saying, I'm stuck. I've gotten in an accident. I am in this place, and now there's no one to help you. And that's the concern, is that if people go out and do this, even now, because the threat is not over, the winds are not over, certainly the rain and the flooding concern isn't over, getting in your car for the next 48 hours in a lot of parts of Southeast Texas is my biggest concern for people, is that they're going to drive into water or they're going to have some sort of accident, just as Matt said, and that's where we're going to see more loss of life and property. And I keep saying, for people in Houston or Austin, because we have, and I have the track, you have to see this, the computer models, how much rain falls and the timing of it, of when this goes through big cities like Austin. It's not over, and it's not just the wind. And
right,
so
don't let that fool you.
Don't let that part fool you, because we're going to keep seeing, and we just saw it fall again, but it's moving very slowly now, northwest at 6 miles per hour. We just got the update for the 6 a.m., and this is all happening as we speak, but I don't know if we can go to it. After we see, and this is the reason we're seeing up to 35 inches, I believe we have that graphic that can show us timing, that moves us through, not just from right now, where we're still at Category 2, but watch this. The rain just sticks around the entire time, and those bands of rain have affected, at that point, Houston and Austin. That's why so many folks are in a flash flood watch that are so far inland, because the warning there is still for up to 20 inches.
And this rain danger, that we're not talking about a day or two. We're talking about up to a week.
Correct. And so that's where we say, okay, now we have, yes, we know the imminent threat of today. But then I think it's Saturday night tonight through Sunday, that 24-hour stretch that's going to be really pertinent. That's where we're going to see people say and feel a little alleviated, and they're not going to even know, unless they've got a radar in their hand in their pocket like we always do, that the rain is right there and it's coming.
Because
for
the bands come whipping around.
Correct. And so then they're going to drive and they're going to say, I'm going to go out for my Saturday night, and then we're going to see water rescues, and tomorrow morning that will end up being the story. And so that's the concern, is just, I think it's easy too in these types of situations. You stay put, most of the time you're going to be all right as far as the next 24 hours after this.
If you've evacuated, as many people have been told strenuously to do, give it to us straight. How long will it take for some of these people to be able to return home?
And Rob said this, but it depends on the officials. It depends on when they feel that the streets are comfortable. When I was in Sandy, when I was in Katrina for sure, it was a minefield. I didn't want to walk around. Every step you took, there was glass, there were, an entire Walgreens had blown up, and so there were just prescriptions and things that were dangerous, on top of course, the power lines that are still live in some cases. And so that takes at least 12 hours to start getting cleaned up. If it's as bad as the damage of a Category 4 can do, and what I'm imagining we'll see when the light comes up, they're going to need to get bulldozers in there before people get there. It could be a good 2 to 5 days, depending on some of these, especially the port towns, where they got some of the heftiest winds, where we're seeing some of these gusts of 132. Structures don't do well.
You're talking days, not weeks or months?
To get back to normal, months.
Right.
But as far as people
Property
coming back to
assessment.
assess, yes, days.
All right. And given the enormity and the longevity of the storm, we want to turn to Rebecca Jarvis, because there is going to be a significant economic impact on this area.
Sure, and we don't want to understate the human toll in all of this, but there's always going to be an economic toll, and this area is the heart of our nation's gasoline and energy country. So if you look at this area, 45% of our refining capacity comes from the Gulf of Mexico. 1/3 of that is located directly in the storm's path. So whether you live in this area or not, the impact is going to be felt in the country in terms of gasoline prices, which could spike anywhere from 5 cents a gallon to 25 cents a gallon. And this will really depend on how heavily hit those refineries are. It takes weeks for a number of these refineries to get back on board, to get back to full capacity. A number of them have shut down in the wake of the storm in order to protect their employees. But those locations, if they get hit hard, they take a long time to get back online. And that gasoline is meant to go out across the country. You heard from Ginger some of that impact that you're going to see when people come back, whether it's the gas stations or the refineries, the buildings. All of these structures are going to have to get back to normal, and there are costs to getting all of these things back to normal. A number of the homes and houses there, CoreLogic has put out an estimate that it could impact buildings, real estate, up to $2 billion. And that's only looking at this from the cost of the wind standpoint. That's not even accounting yet for the flooding. So we are looking at a potentially incredibly expensive cleanup, an incredibly expensive recovery, and something that's going to hit everybody in this country, whether you live in the location or not.
Wow, an estimated $1 to $2 billion.
That is just from the wind and storm surge. That doesn't even account for the flooding, which, again, obviously is going to be a big cost as well. We know that after storms like these, a number of people come in, the assessors come in, the insurance companies come in, they take a look at the damage, just the wind and storm damage, $1 to $2 billion in property losses from this.
ABC's Rebecca Jarvis, our chief business and economics correspondent. Thank you very much. Let's get it out now to ABC's Mary Bruce, who covers Congress and the White House for us. She's at the White House this morning. Mary, as you know, this is the first major national disaster faced by our relatively new president, 7 months in office, roughly, Donald J. Trump. How much preparation has he done?
This is no question a major test for the president, and he is keeping a very close eye on this storm. We know monitoring this through the night. The president is actually spending the weekend up at Camp David, but he has been being briefed in recent days by his FEMA administrator, by his national security team. We know he will be briefed later today during a teleconference with members of that team. But look, the president doesn't have much experience or any governing experience dealing with these kinds of issues. The White House has been asked about that directly. They insist that this is actually right up the president's alley and that he is acutely focused on making sure that Americans get all the help they need, those who are in the storm's path. And we saw overnight the president going ahead and approving the Texas governor's request, signing that disaster declaration, which officially makes funds available, federal funds available to help with any of the recovery effort. Or as the president tweeted, he said it unleashes the full force of the government's help.
But Mary, as this storm was making landfall, the White House made an enormous amount of news on at least three fronts. One, the president announced that he's going to pardon an extremely controversial sheriff in Arizona, Joe Arpaio, who had been held in criminal contempt of court for continuing to racially profile Latinos and pull them over and ask for their ID to see if they're here legally. Also, he announced the departure of a controversial aide, Sebastian Gorka, and he announced that he had given guidance to the military about banning transgender people from serving. And on top of all of that, the North Koreans made some news by testing some short-range missiles. So that's a lot to ask you about. But walk us through this news from the White House in the middle of this storm.
Dan, it has been an incredibly busy and news-filled 24 hours. The president, while he's dealing with this physical storm, is now in the middle of quite a political storm because of these controversial decisions that you just mentioned. Let's start with Sheriff Joe Arpaio. The president overnight announcing he is going to pardon him. Arpaio is a lightning rod of a figure who has come to symbolize a lot of the divisive immigration debate in this country. He was convicted of criminal contempt for ignoring a judge's order not to detain suspected undocumented immigrants. He's been accused of racial profiling and discrimination. Now, he had not even been sentenced yet, but the president, in announcing this pardon, did not mention Arpaio's conviction, but said Arpaio gave years of admirable service to our nation and called him a worthy candidate for a presidential pardon. Now, as you can imagine, the president's critics, many people disagree with this move and disagree with that assertion, including actually the two Republican senators from Arizona, Senator John McCain, coming out overnight criticizing this move, questioning the president, saying no one is above the law. And of course, as you mentioned, it comes just a few hours after the president made that announcement about the transgender ban, going ahead and signing that long-awaited and controversial directive to ban transgender individuals from joining the military, although the president is giving the defense secretary a large amount of latitude here to determine what happens with those who are currently serving in the armed forces. And look, the president's been getting a lot of pushback already for making these announcements, for taking these moves right in the middle of this hurricane, being criticized, especially by the Democratic leader of the Senate, Chuck Schumer, saying that the president is using the hurricane. He accuses the president of using the hurricane as cover.
And speaking of the actual hurricane, Hurricane Harvey, has the White House, has President Trump made any indication that he would plan, as many presidents do in the aftermath of storms like these, to go survey the damage, talk to the people most affected?
Yeah, Amy, the White House has suggested that the president will be on the ground, will be visiting Texas sometime early next week. And it's important to point out that the White House is, of course, acutely aware of not trying to repeat some of the mistakes in the past. Of course, President Bush came under criticism for waiting too long to respond, for his hesitant response to Hurricane Katrina. This White House clearly not wanting to repeat those mistakes. And the president being urged by Republican lawmakers, Senator Chuck Grassley tweeting at the president, urging him to take this hurricane seriously and not repeat some of those mistakes of the past.
ABC's Mary Bruce reporting from the White House this morning. Of course, it always is an exquisitely delicate dance for a president at a moment like this, because when a president visits a disaster zone, it sucks up resources at a time when those resources are badly needed. So this is a tightrope that President Trump is going to have to walk, that many presidents before him have also walked. Again, ABC's Mary Bruce, thank you. We'll be back to you many times throughout the course of this very busy morning. Many of our viewers at this point will be transitioning over to local news. We'll be back with more GMA throughout the rest of the morning. For those of you sticking with us, we'll be continuing our coverage right here on ABC News.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.